The restaurant was buzzing with life that evening. It was one of those places where every detail mattered, the soft lighting, the polished wooden tables, and the faint smell of fresh bread and Italian herbs floating in the air. Waiters moved gracefully between tables, balancing plates of steaming pasta and glasses of sparkling wine. The clinking of cutlery mixed with quiet conversations, creating a lively but refined atmosphere. For most customers, it was just another night out, but tonight, something extraordinary was about to happen. At one of the corner tables, a group of well-dressed individuals had gathered. Among them sat a billionaire, a man whose name was known in every major city across the world. He was tall, confident, and carried himself like someone who was used to getting what he wanted. His presence alone seemed to make the room slightly quieter. Everyone in his vicinity subconsciously adjusted their behavior, aware of his wealth and power. But the billionaire, used to attention and influence, barely noticed the people around him. He seemed impatient, tapping his fingers on the table as he glanced at the menu, clearly expecting the best service money could buy. Meanwhile, a young waitress was preparing for the evening rush. She had been working at the restaurant for a few months and was still learning the rhythm of the place. Despite her nervousness, she had a natural charm, her smile was warm, her movements precise, and she always greeted customers politely. Tonight, she was assigned to the billionaire's table, an assignment that both excited and intimidated her. She knew that serving someone of such status required attention to every detail, from the way she took the order to how she delivered the food. The billionaire noticed her almost immediately. Perhaps it was her calm demeanor or the way she approached the table with confidence despite his reputation, but he decided to engage with her. However, instead of being polite or friendly, he chose to test her, perhaps even provoke her. He made a comment in Italian, his words sharp and sarcastic, clearly meant to belittle her or make her feel small. The tone of his voice carried confidence and superiority, the kind that comes from a lifetime of never being contradicted. Many patrons nearby couldn't help but glance over, sensing that something unusual was unfolding at the table. Most people would have been intimidated in that moment. It's not every day that someone with immense wealth and power speaks to you in a condescending tone. But the young waitress didn't flinch. She paused for a brief moment, taking in what was said, and something remarkable happened. Her expression stayed calm, and her body language remained confident. She didn't look down, she didn't stumble over her words, and she certainly didn't back away. It was as if she understood that respect isn't about money or status but about courage and intelligence. The atmosphere around the table began to shift. Where there was once tension and expectation of submission, there was now a quiet anticipation. Everyone watching, from other diners to the staff nearby, felt that something extraordinary was about to occur. The young waitress, standing poised with a notepad in her hand, seemed ready to respond, but no one knew exactly how she would. The billionaire, on the other hand, leaned back slightly, expecting her to falter or respond with hesitation, as most people did when confronted with his arrogance. As she prepared to speak, the room seemed to hold its breath. Her training in customer service and her innate confidence combined, allowing her to reply in a way that was both polite and clever. The exchange, though just beginning, promised to be memorable. It wasn't just about a billionaire and a waitress, it was about the collision of power and humility, arrogance and wit. For the young woman, this was a moment to demonstrate that respect and intelligence could stand toe-to-toe with wealth and influence. For the billionaire, it was a rare situation where someone might actually challenge his sense of superiority. In that quiet, elegant restaurant, with the soft hum of conversation in the background and the clatter of dishes from the kitchen, the stage was perfectly set. This evening, which could have been ordinary for everyone else, would become unforgettable. The introduction to this story is not just about a restaurant or a billionaire, it is about the tension between two very different worlds, one of immense privilege and one of humble determination. And as the waitress took her first step toward replying, the room unknowingly became a witness to a real-life story that would soon go viral, a story that reminded everyone present that courage and intelligence could shine brighter than wealth and status. The atmosphere at the billionaire's table was charged with subtle tension. The young waitress, already aware of his intimidating presence, approached carefully, balancing a tray with 2 glasses of sparkling water. She smiled politely, hoping to make a good impression, while the billionaire leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning her from head to toe with a faint smirk on his lips. This wasn't going to be a normal interaction. As soon as she greeted him in Italian, offering a warm, "Buonasera, sir, how may I assist you tonight?" the billionaire's smirk widened. He saw the polite tone and the composed posture and decided, almost instinctively, to test her. But this wasn't a casual test, it was meant to provoke, to make her stumble, to show her place in the world, as he often believed was necessary when interacting with someone of lower social standing. "Are you sure you know how to handle something as simple as this menu?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm, his Italian perfectly clear yet laced with condescension. His tone carried a weight that made the words sting more than their meaning. The sentence itself wasn't complicated, but the way it was delivered, slow, precise, and meant to belittle, was what made it offensive. Many might have laughed nervously or tried to brush it off, but this waitress did not. For a moment, the young woman hesitated, not out of fear, but because she understood the gravity of the situation. She realized that this encounter could define the entire evening, not just for herself, but for everyone watching. She also knew that responding poorly could escalate the tension or embarrass her in front of other diners, yet saying nothing would also feel like giving in. The billionaire leaned forward slightly, clearly expecting a reaction, and added another jab. "Do you even understand Italian well enough to take orders without messing them up?" His voice was calm but carried an unmistakable edge, the kind that only someone accustomed to authority could command. Around the table, his friends laughed quietly, thinking the joke was harmless, while nearby diners began to glance over, sensing the power imbalance and anticipating the moment of humiliation. But the young waitress, keeping her composure, straightened her back and took a slow breath. She didn't flinch, she didn't raise her voice, and most importantly, she didn't let him see that she was affected. In that instant, something shifted in the air. The energy in the restaurant moved from anticipation of humiliation to suspense. Everyone waiting for a spectacle realized that this young woman wasn't just another employee, she was someone with intelligence, poise, and courage. She decided to respond, not with anger or sarcasm, but with precision. Her voice was calm, polite, yet carried a subtle firmness that instantly caught the billionaire off guard. She corrected the misconception in his statement with a clever twist that exposed the arrogance in his words without being rude. Her reply wasn't just a comeback, it was an assertion of dignity, skillfully delivered in a way that demanded respect without shouting or raising her voice. At that moment, the room seemed to pause. The billionaire's smirk faltered, replaced by a faint flicker of surprise, then a flash of disbelief. He hadn't expected this. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not in public and certainly not by someone he assumed was beneath his notice. The tension shifted from the waitress being potentially embarrassed to the billionaire feeling slightly, if not completely, unbalanced. Other diners began to notice. Subtle nods, quiet gasps, and exchanged glances spread across the restaurant. Even the staff, trained to remain neutral, exchanged surprised looks. The scene was unfolding like a silent drama, a real-life showdown of wit versus arrogance. This wasn't a storybook duel, it was real, immediate, and impossible to ignore. In this exchange, the young waitress demonstrated something profound, that respect, intelligence, and confidence are not determined by wealth or status. The billionaire, despite all his money and influence, had just experienced a taste of what it feels like to be outmatched in a very public setting. And while the insult had started the encounter, it had inadvertently set the stage for one of the most remarkable displays of composure and quick thinking anyone in the restaurant had ever seen. By the time she finished speaking, the billionaire had no choice but to pause and absorb the moment. He realized that what he intended as a small act of condescension had backfired spectacularly. The waitress had turned the offense into an opportunity to assert her intelligence and integrity, quietly reminding everyone in the room that true power isn't measured by money, it's measured by confidence, composure, and the courage to speak up when it matters. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath as the young waitress finally spoke. Her voice was calm, steady, and perfectly clear, carrying just enough authority to command attention without sounding rude. Every word she said seemed to hang in the air, making even the billionaire pause mid-sentence. She didn't stumble, she didn't hesitate, and most importantly, she didn't act intimidated. Even the soft hum of background conversation seemed to fade as diners instinctively focused on the table where the unexpected confrontation was unfolding. Her response was simple yet striking. She replied in flawless Italian, not only correcting the billionaire's assumption but doing so with a subtle hint of humor that revealed the arrogance in his words. It was clever, quick, and perfectly timed, the kind of response that required both intelligence and confidence, the kind of response that left no room for insult to continue, yet didn't escalate the situation into open conflict. The billionaire, who had expected her to falter or respond awkwardly, froze. His expression shifted from smug amusement to shock, and then to disbelief. He could not believe that someone he considered beneath him had just outwitted him so effortlessly. Around the table, his friends exchanged surprised glances, unsure of how to react, while other diners, initially curious, were now captivated by the scene, their phones subtly emerging as many discreetly tried to catch a glimpse, sensing that they were witnessing a moment worth remembering. The waitress continued, speaking with calm authority and maintaining perfect composure. Her words were measured but firm, leaving no doubt that she was unafraid and fully capable of handling the situation. Every gesture, from the way she held her notepad to the subtle tilt of her head, reinforced her confidence. She didn't need to raise her voice or make grand gestures. The precision of her language and the clarity of her delivery said it all. The tension at the table shifted dramatically. Where the billionaire had once controlled the energy, the balance had now changed. The room seemed to acknowledge this, as subtle whispers spread among nearby diners. Some exchanged quiet smiles, recognizing the boldness and poise of the young woman. Even the staff watching from a distance seemed momentarily stunned, realizing that they were witnessing more than a casual restaurant exchange. They were witnessing a display of intelligence, courage, and dignity under pressure. Despite the billionaire's wealth and reputation, he could do nothing but sit back and absorb the impact of her words. His usual sense of control was gone, replaced by a rare moment of vulnerability, one that came not from force or argument, but from being so unexpectedly outmatched by someone he assumed was inexperienced and timid. The waitress had turned the offense into an opportunity, transforming a potentially humiliating moment into one that showcased her strength and quick thinking. By the time she finished her reply, the atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted completely. The focus was no longer on the billionaire and his status, it was on the young woman who had responded with intelligence, grace, and wit. The diners around her felt a sense of admiration, recognizing the courage it took to confront someone so powerful without losing composure. Even some staff members whispered quietly among themselves, impressed by the way she had handled the situation flawlessly. It was a quiet victory, subtle but undeniable. The billionaire had thought that money and status would intimidate her, but she had proved that confidence, wit, and calm decisiveness could surpass any social hierarchy. In that moment, the young waitress became more than just a server. She became a symbol of resilience, intelligence, and dignity, reminding everyone present that true power is not about wealth or influence, but about courage, clarity, and the ability to stand up for oneself. The incident left a lasting impression. Patrons who had been mere observers found themselves inspired, realizing that even in the face of arrogance, a composed and intelligent response can change the energy of a room, challenge assumptions, and command respect. What had begun as a routine service interaction had transformed into a defining moment, not for the billionaire, but for the young waitress, whose courage and quick thinking would be remembered long after the restaurant returned to its usual rhythm. In that moment, she didn't just answer an insult. She rewrote the rules of the encounter, showing that confidence and intelligence could stand shoulder to shoulder with privilege and power. And as the room settled back into its normal hum, everyone who had witnessed the exchange knew they had seen something extraordinary, a real-life story of dignity triumphing over arrogance, one perfectly delivered response at a time. For a moment, the billionaire sat frozen, his expression unreadable. The words of the young waitress echoed in his mind, sharp and precise, delivered with a confidence he had rarely encountered. His usual air of superiority seemed to waver, replaced by something he was unaccustomed to, surprise, then confusion, then a flicker of frustration. He had been so certain that his wealth, status, and sharp tongue would intimidate anyone, yet here was someone, a waitress no less, standing before him with courage and intelligence that challenged everything he believed about power. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, trying to mask the unexpected vulnerability, but the cracks in his facade were obvious. His friends at the table exchanged nervous glances, sensing the shift in energy. Their quiet laughter from moments ago had faded, replaced by uneasy silence. They weren't used to seeing someone take control of a situation like this, especially not someone who, in their social hierarchy, was considered beneath them. The air at the table had changed, and the entire restaurant could feel it. For the first time that evening, the billionaire realized that his money couldn't buy him respect, that his usual tactics, sarcasm, condescension, and intimidation, were ineffective against this young woman. It was a foreign feeling, one he had rarely, if ever, experienced in public. His usual quick wit and charm seemed inadequate now, unable to regain the dominance he had taken for granted for years. As he searched for a response, his mind raced, but each thought felt heavier, as if her words had put him on the defensive in a way that no wealth or reputation could fix. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to try another sarcastic jab, but he paused, realizing that any hasty remark would only make him look worse. Every diner within earshot had noticed the exchange, and a poorly chosen word could lead to humiliation far beyond what he could imagine. The billionaire's arrogance, his weapon of choice, had suddenly become a liability, leaving him unusually cautious, almost uncertain. The young waitress, aware of his reaction, maintained her composure. Every slight shift in her posture and every measured glance reinforced the quiet strength of her presence. She didn't gloat, she didn't mock him, yet her mere confidence highlighted his discomfort. It was a subtle but undeniable reversal of roles. Where once he had commanded attention, now he was being observed, silently judged, and outmaneuvered by her grace and wit. Around the restaurant, other diners had begun to notice the tension. The soft hum of conversation had quieted near the table, and discreet glances were exchanged. Everyone could sense the unexpected power shift. The billionaire, so used to being admired or feared, was now facing something entirely new, the realization that influence and money could not protect him from being called out when he was wrong. He shifted in his chair, the corners of his mouth twitching, trying to regain composure. His eyes flicked toward the young waitress, perhaps searching for a hint of apology or submission, but there was none, only the same calm, poised, intelligent gaze that had left him momentarily speechless. In that moment, he understood something he rarely allowed himself to admit, that intelligence, courage, and presence could rival wealth in ways that money never could. The billionaire's friends were now fully aware of the situation. Some tried to laugh it off, while others avoided eye contact with the young waitress, sensing her dominance in the encounter. Even the staff, moving quietly around the tables, were impressed by the subtle but undeniable shift. They had seen many wealthy customers act arrogantly, but few had been humbled so quietly and effectively. The billionaire's momentary discomfort had transformed into a lesson in humility, one that no amount of money could erase. As the waitress returned to her duties, leaving the billionaire to reflect, he realized the encounter was already being remembered, not as a minor insult or a fleeting exchange, but as a story that spoke volumes about respect, intelligence, and courage. The billionaire, despite his usual confidence and bravado, had been outmaneuvered in the simplest yet most powerful way, a perfect, calm, and witty response from someone he underestimated. In that quiet, elegant restaurant, the billionaire's reaction marked a turning point in the evening. The arrogance that had dominated the air just minutes ago had been replaced with a mixture of surprise, admiration, and a rare humility, and while he may have been wealthy beyond measure, the young waitress had shown him, and everyone watching, that true influence comes not from status or money, but from intelligence, poise, and the courage to stand one's ground. By now, the entire restaurant seemed to be aware of what had just happened. What began as a private exchange between a billionaire and a young waitress had quickly drawn the attention of everyone nearby. Patrons who had been quietly enjoying their meals were now subtly shifting in their seats, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the interaction. The energy in the room had changed. It was no longer just about fine dining or wealth, it was about courage, intelligence, and the unexpected triumph of someone underestimated. Some diners whispered to one another, quietly commenting on the waitress's confidence. "Did you see that?" one asked. "She didn't even flinch." Another replied, and her Italian, flawless. She really called him out. These murmurs spread like wildfire, moving from table to table. The restaurant staff, who were trained to observe without interfering, exchanged amazed glances, impressed not just by her composure but by her ability to respond so cleverly in a high-pressure situation. Meanwhile, smartphones began to emerge. A few diners, sensing that they were witnessing something extraordinary, discreetly lifted their phones to record short clips. No one wanted to make a scene, yet everyone wanted to capture this moment of real-life drama. It wasn't just entertainment, it was a story, a reminder that even the most arrogant figures could be humbled by wit and courage. Within minutes, a couple of these clips were already being shared online, posted to social media platforms with captions like, "Waitress stuns billionaire with perfect reply," and "The richest man in the room just got schooled." The viral nature of the event was unstoppable. People who had not been in the restaurant yet knew about it within hours. Friends called friends, videos circulated, and online communities began discussing the encounter. The young waitress, previously just another employee doing her job, was suddenly being recognized far beyond the walls of the restaurant. Comments flooded in praising her bravery, her intelligence, and her ability to remain composed in the face of arrogance. Memes were created, shares multiplied, and before long, the story reached people around the world. Back in the restaurant, the billionaire was becoming acutely aware of the growing attention. He had initially expected to impress or intimidate, but instead, he had become the center of quiet ridicule, albeit without anyone openly mocking him. His friends tried to mask their own discomfort, nervously laughing or attempting to change the subject, but it was too late. The energy had shifted irreversibly. The waitress had won not through confrontation but through calm precision, turning a potentially humiliating encounter into a display of brilliance. Interestingly, even some of the restaurant staff who were not directly involved began treating her differently. Her colleagues whispered in admiration, acknowledging her clever handling of the situation. For the first time, she was not just the waitress serving tables, she was a symbol of dignity and courage, someone who had stood up against someone who assumed he was untouchable. The recognition was quiet but palpable, spreading from the immediate room to the larger online audience that had begun following the story. By the end of the evening, the restaurant had returned to a semblance of normalcy, yet the incident left a lingering impression. Patrons left with stories to tell, phones filled with videos to share, and a newfound respect for the young woman who had challenged power with nothing but her intelligence and composure. Even the billionaire could no longer ignore the reality: this was no ordinary exchange. What he had intended as a casual insult had transformed into a moment that would define the evening, perhaps even linger in his memory far longer than he expected. The story of the encounter continued to grow in the following days. Online news articles picked it up, praising the waitress for her quick thinking and courage. Social media platforms buzzed with commentary and admiration. People from different countries and backgrounds shared the clips and posts, marveling at how someone so young and seemingly ordinary could command respect so effortlessly. It became more than a restaurant story, it was a lesson in humility, dignity, and the unexpected power of courage. In the end, public recognition wasn't just about viral fame. It was a validation of the waitress's intelligence, her poise, and her ability to handle an uncomfortable, high-pressure situation with grace. What began as a routine job had turned into an unforgettable moment, not only for the billionaire who had underestimated her but for every person who witnessed, recorded, or shared the story. And in that recognition, the waitress had achieved something far greater than anyone could have imagined. She had shown the world that confidence, wit, and composure are qualities that no wealth or status can overshadow. The moment in the restaurant had already begun to take on a life of its own. What started as a tense interaction between a billionaire and a young waitress was no longer just a story about a rude comment or a clever comeback. It had transformed into a lesson in humility, one that rippled through the restaurant, through social media, and into the minds of everyone who witnessed or heard about it. For the billionaire, the lesson was immediate and unavoidable. He had entered the restaurant expecting to assert his dominance, confident that wealth and reputation would be enough to intimidate anyone he encountered. But the young waitress had effortlessly dismantled that assumption. Her words were measured, her tone calm, and her delivery flawless. In that instant, he realized that power wasn't only about money, influence, or status, it was also about intelligence, composure, and the ability to command respect without raising one's voice. The lesson was humbling, sharp, and, in a sense, unavoidable. The waitress, of course, had not set out to teach a lesson. She was simply responding with honesty, wit, and dignity to an unfair insult. Yet, her actions spoke louder than any deliberate moral or speech could. She reminded everyone present that respect is earned through behavior, not inherited through wealth. That day, the billionaire's presence became secondary to the message she conveyed without even trying. Confidence, courage, and composure can challenge the highest levels of arrogance. Around the restaurant, the lesson in humility was evident to all who watched. Patrons whispered about how astonishingly calm and smart she had been. They exchanged stories of times when they had witnessed arrogance, and how, in contrast, she had turned an insult into a moment of empowerment. Even the staff, who were accustomed to serving demanding or dismissive customers, marveled at her poise. They recognized that she had not only protected her dignity but had also subtly reminded the billionaire, and by extension, anyone watching, that arrogance cannot overpower self-respect. The billionaire's friends, once amused by his sarcasm, now seemed uncomfortably aware of the shift in power. His usual charm and wit had failed, and they had silently observed how quickly the encounter had flipped. The lesson in humility wasn't delivered through confrontation or argument, it was delivered through calm intelligence and self-assured behavior. It was a reminder that wealth may open doors, but it cannot automatically earn respect. Social media amplified the lesson even further. Clips of the exchange went viral, with captions praising the waitress for standing her ground, for demonstrating intelligence and courage, and for delivering a reply that exposed arrogance without escalating conflict. People from all over the world began discussing the incident, not just as entertainment, but as a real-life lesson in humility, proving that anyone, no matter their position or status, can be outmatched by composure and intelligence. Interestingly, the lesson didn't stop with the billionaire. For many viewers online, the story became a reminder to reflect on their own behavior. How often had they assumed superiority over others because of position, money, or privilege? How often had they forgotten that respect is mutual, earned through actions rather than assumed through circumstance? The young waitress had become more than a viral sensation, she had become a symbol of humility, courage, and the quiet power of intelligence. Even within the restaurant, days after the incident, the story lingered. Patrons returned, staff still talked about it, and the billionaire, though unlikely to admit it publicly, had experienced a humbling reality check. For him, the lesson was clear: no amount of money or status can replace the respect that comes from intelligence, courage, and integrity. For everyone else, it was an inspiring reminder that humility is not weakness, it is strength expressed through awareness, composure, and wisdom. By the end of that week, the story had taken on a life of its own. Articles, social media posts, and even discussions in cafes and offices referenced the incident as a teaching moment. People were sharing it not to mock the billionaire but to highlight the power of composure, quick thinking, and the courage to stand up for oneself. The lesson in humility had gone beyond the restaurant walls, it had become a universal story about respect, dignity, and the surprising strength found in those who refuse to be intimidated. In the quiet moments after the evening ended, as the restaurant returned to its usual rhythm, the lesson lingered. The billionaire had been reminded, publicly and privately, that arrogance has limits, and the young waitress had shown the world that intelligence and courage are qualities that cannot be bought or overshadowed. That day, humility had been the true victor, delivered in the most unexpected yet powerful way. The events of that evening did not end when the dinner service concluded. In fact, the aftermath of the encounter quickly proved to be just as powerful as the exchange itself. The young waitress, who had handled the billionaire's insult with such composure and intelligence, became the subject of conversations not just in the restaurant, but across social media, local news outlets, and online communities. Her brief, poised response had left an indelible mark, and people everywhere were eager to celebrate her courage. Inside the restaurant, the atmosphere slowly returned to normal, but the energy had changed. The billionaire, once the dominant presence in the room, now sat quietly, his earlier arrogance subdued. He remained polite, even reserved, aware that his usual tactics no longer worked. For the first time in a long while, he felt the subtle sting of being outwitted in public. His friends, who had laughed at his initial sarcasm, now found themselves caught in an awkward silence, unsure how to react, aware that the young waitress had earned a quiet but undeniable victory. Meanwhile, the staff continued their work, but their admiration for the waitress was palpable. She moved through the restaurant with the same calm professionalism, taking orders and serving food, yet her colleagues whispered among themselves, impressed by how she had transformed a tense encounter into a showcase of intelligence and dignity. The respect she earned wasn't just from handling the billionaire, it was from showing that courage and poise can command attention and admiration far beyond what money or status can buy. Outside the restaurant, the story began to spread rapidly. Videos captured by patrons went viral within hours. Social media users marveled at the interaction, praising the young waitress for standing her ground and delivering a response that was both clever and composed. Comments flooded in from around the world, celebrating her intelligence, courage, and dignity. Many called it a lesson in humility for the billionaire, others called it inspirational, and some simply marveled at how someone so young had handled a high-pressure situation so flawlessly. News outlets picked up the story, giving it a wider audience. Articles described the incident in vivid detail, emphasizing how the billionaire had underestimated the waitress and how quickly the situation had turned in her favor. Journalists highlighted the significance of the exchange, not as a scandal, but as an example of how intelligence, wit, and confidence can triumph over arrogance. The story resonated deeply because it reminded readers that true power does not come from wealth or status, it comes from character, courage, and the ability to act with dignity under pressure. Even among people who had never seen the video, the story circulated widely. Friends shared it in messages, co-workers discussed it during breaks, and strangers debated it online, analyzing the dynamics of the interaction. The young waitress became more than just a viral sensation, she became a symbol of quiet strength, a reminder that anyone, regardless of social standing, can stand up to arrogance and emerge victorious. The billionaire, for his part, quietly reflected on the incident in the days that followed. Though he never publicly admitted it, he had learned an important lesson. The encounter had shown him that wealth and status are not substitutes for intelligence, composure, or respect. He had been reminded, in a moment he had not anticipated, that true influence comes from actions and behavior, not from money or social position. It was a subtle but humbling experience, one that would likely stay with him far longer than the brief insult or the witty response. Meanwhile, the waitress returned to her normal routine, but the impact of the event lingered. She continued to perform her job with the same professionalism, yet there was a newfound recognition from her colleagues, patrons, and even strangers online. People admired her not because she had gone viral, but because she had shown that standing up for oneself, with grace and intelligence, can change the way people perceive power, respect, and dignity. In the end, the aftermath of that night was more than just online attention or viral fame. It was a shift in perspective, for the billionaire, for the restaurant staff, for the diners, and for the countless people who saw the story later. The encounter had reminded everyone that humility is not weakness, and that courage, composure, and intelligence can leave a lasting impression far beyond the moment it occurs. And so, what began as a simple dinner became a powerful story of respect, character, and the unexpected consequences of underestimating someone's strength of mind and spirit. As the evening drew to a close, the restaurant slowly returned to its usual rhythm, yet the events of the night had left a lasting impression that no one could ignore. The young waitress, who had handled the billionaire's insult with grace and intelligence, moved quietly among the tables, taking orders and serving food with the same calm professionalism she had always displayed, yet there was a new aura around her, a quiet confidence that came from knowing she had faced an extraordinary situation and emerged victorious. The billionaire, on the other hand, remained at his table longer than most of his friends, sipping a glass of wine in thoughtful silence. His usual arrogance had softened into reflection. As he replayed the interaction over and over in his mind, he realized that wealth, power, and status, while impressive, were not substitutes for composure, intelligence, and respect. In that brief exchange, he had been reminded, in a way few people ever are, that true strength is not measured by the size of one's bank account, but by the ability to remain poised, confident, and morally grounded even in uncomfortable or challenging situations. The staff, patrons, and even nearby tables continued to murmur about what they had witnessed. Their conversations ranged from admiration of the waitress's quick thinking to discussions about the billionaire's stunned reaction. Some spoke about the subtle art of humility, others about the unexpected ways courage can shine in ordinary places. The story had grown beyond the confines of the restaurant walls. It had become a lesson, a narrative that people would remember and recount, not because it was scandalous, but because it was profoundly human. The young waitress herself felt a mix of emotions. Though she kept them controlled, she felt pride, certainly, but more than that, she felt clarity, knowing that she had upheld her dignity without needing to escalate or confront with hostility. She had turned a moment of potential embarrassment into a moment of empowerment, and in doing so, she had not only impressed everyone in the restaurant, but also inspired countless people around the world who would later see her story online. As social media clips continued to circulate, millions of people began to discuss the encounter, praising her composure and intelligence, sharing it as an example of how courage and self-respect can overcome arrogance and entitlement. The story became a symbol of empowerment, demonstrating that even in a world obsessed with wealth and status, it is character, courage, and confidence that ultimately command respect. People related to her because she was ordinary, approachable, and authentic, yet capable of extraordinary poise under pressure. The billionaire, though wealthy beyond imagination, had been subtly humbled. His ego had been challenged in the most public of ways, and the lesson was unlikely to be forgotten. While he may have returned to his life of privilege and influence, he had now been reminded that respect cannot be demanded, it must be earned, and arrogance, no matter how well financed, can be quietly but effectively countered. In the following days, articles, posts, and videos continued to share the story, highlighting the brilliance of the young waitress and the rare moment of humility experienced by the billionaire. For her, it was not about fame or recognition, it was about the quiet triumph of dignity, wit, and courage. For the public, it became a story to remember. One that reminded everyone that confidence and intelligence can level the playing field, that even the most powerful figures are not untouchable when met with calm strength. The evening had started with an insult, with a display of arrogance that might have crushed a lesser person, yet it ended with a universal truth, one witnessed and remembered by countless individuals. Dignity, composure, and courage are far more powerful than status, wealth, or intimidation. The young waitress had not just defended herself, she had rewritten the rules of respect in that moment, leaving an unforgettable impression on everyone who saw the encounter unfold. And so, as the restaurant lights dimmed and the night settled in, the story of that evening remained vivid in the minds of all who had been there, and soon, for millions more online, it was a story of humility triumphing over arrogance, of intelligence standing against entitlement, and of courage shining where it was least expected. A simple act, a calm response, and a moment of brilliance had created a story that would be told, shared, and remembered for years to come. In the end, the real winner was not wealth, power, or status, it was the young waitress, whose courage, intelligence, and dignity had turned an insult into a timeless lesson, a story that reminded everyone, everywhere, that true strength lies not in what you have, but in how you carry yourself. And in that quiet, unforgettable way, the night had changed everything.